Welcome to another episode of Voices. I'm your host, Keston Jones. Visionaries offering information with clarity, expertise, and substance. We are content experts. Let your voice be heard. Welcome to another episode of Voices. I'm your host, Keston Jones. And with me, we have another special guest. And I thought it would be a great idea to bring this guest on the show, Miss Xenia Fuller.
Hello, nice to see you today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Miss Fuller, for agreeing to be on the show. Now, you are someone that I think is an anomaly. And when I say an anomaly, I think your embodiment of who you are aesthetically. You're a black woman, you're a young woman, you're educated. However, you have a background that is unlike most people that I know. And I felt that it would be a great idea to share or have you share some of the things about yourself. Because many of the people in our community have like this one idea of a path, of a career path. One idea of whether it be a basketball player, whether it be a nurse, whether it be, you know, someone who just believes that they should engage in criminal activity or what have you. And for you, you were someone that was raised in the community, but still chose to do a different path. So I think it'd be a great idea to share your story. So again, thank you for agreeing to be on the show. How are you feeling today?
I'm a little nervous, but always willing to speak with you.
A little nervous. Okay, so tell us about yourself. You know, your upbringing. Where were you raised?
So my mother is from the Caribbean and my father is American. I grew up in the South Bronx. I spent a little time in Brooklyn, and we spent the majority of my life in the South Bronx. And at some point when I was maybe 12 or 13, I went through a program called Prep for Prep 9, which allowed me to go to boarding school in New Hampshire. And being there and engaging with, you know, a very diverse community, I became interested in Japanese and in Japan.
Wait, hold on. Well, because you hear this, right? Someone, okay. So Prep for Prep 9. Tell us about that program and what does it take to be enrolled in that type of a program?
So I went to one of the talented and gifted schools in Manhattan, and I was very lucky in that they would oftentimes bring people from outside programs and so forth to speak to us about various opportunities. I think that in our community, sometimes there's a real lack of connection to resources, and that was one thing that I was very blessed to have access to. They brought in individuals who spoke to us about potentially going off to boarding schools and what that could mean for us and what a future away could look like in terms of shaping our independence, in terms of growing culturally, in terms of growing in our understanding of what it means to be global citizens. And so at that point, I wanted to be a writer. And I thought this idea of going away to boarding school and going to a school where I could have access to that many books, the libraries, you know, the campuses, and, you know, see things that I really felt I didn't have an opportunity to see or be exposed to in the South Bronx was something that interested me. And so it's a process where you take exams, they give you IQ tests and things of that nature. And if you get in, you go to Saturday school every week. And then in the summer, you're attending classes from Monday through Friday. So it's intensive in that sense. But if you make it through and you apply to a boarding school and you get in, then you're able to go away to boarding school for free. And some of these schools are upwards of $45,000. So it's really, you know, and a tremendous opportunity is being provided to inner city children, especially when they have the potentials and the minds to do that. And so, you know, at that point, I just really wanted to write. I really wanted to perform optimally. I wanted to reach that potential for myself. And so I told my parents I want to go to boarding school and I want to do this program. They weren't so happy about it at first. You know, they didn't really think it was a good idea. Not many people want their 13-year-old child to go away or feel that their child necessarily has the maturity or, you know, the level of experience that they would feel comfortable that when their child is being exposed to obstacles or problems or the influence of others, that they'll always make the right choices. But, you know, my parents, they stepped back and they said, hey, she's willing to work for this. so we'll let her go for it.
Well, definitely shout out to your parents, man, for actually, taking that risk. I think that there's many examples of parents when I think of like Serena Williams' dad and their mom, and being from Compton and seeing that their children, their daughters had the ability to play tennis and really invest in their children. And there's plenty countless examples, and I really want to elevate your parents and them seeing that one, you were gifted and talented from an early age and actually took it upon themselves to put you and push you in that direction, and really just allowing you or sharing in your vision of what you saw for yourself. So I just wanted to just definitely give kudos to your parents. So boarding school, well, how was that like?
It was quite an experience. One thing I would definitely say is that I probably wouldn't be the person I am today if I hadn't gone there. I think that in terms of my understanding of what the world was, it very drastically changed when I reached boarding school. I myself, my family was not very well off economically. And you're going to a place in the South Bronx where you may not have seen many things, and you're going to boarding school where sometimes your classmates may have parents who are very wealthy, or or they're going on trips every summer or Christmas, or they have exposure to things that you've never heard of. And so it's really a culture shock in terms of having to acclimate yourself to a new environment and suddenly in a way benefiting from the environment. Meaning I'm not rich and I don't have these resources and so forth, but now I'm able to go and take music lessons or go to a library where there's thousands of books on these various subjects or things of that nature, or I'm hearing of words that I've never heard of, or foods that I've never heard of. So there's so much exposure to a world broader and outside of yourself that it makes you reflect on who you are, who you want to be, and what you can potentially become.
So talk a little about meeting these classmates and the diverse communities they come from, educational or financial backgrounds. How was that like, and was it like a easy or seamless thing to do, or did you have apprehension? Were you apprehensive about it at that time?
I think it was a complete shift for me in understanding people, because oftentimes when you're in a community or you're in a network, you think in a particular way and you have a particular mindset and you have an understanding of the world or certain issues that are based on the way that your community views them. And when you are then put into a place where people are coming from all regions of the world, not even just different states, but different countries, you're learning about how different cultures perceive certain issues of politeness or behavior or even political issues very differently than you, and also having to be culturally sensitive to those things and changing the way that you interpret your world based on that. And so in a way it forces you to grow, because you can't be narrow-minded when you're put into a space like that. And particularly the boarding school I went to, Phillips Exeter Academy, their method of education is really it's a round table in a sense. They call it a Harkness table, but it's an oval and everyone sits around it. And the way that the teacher teaches is not that they sit there and they spend the class teaching you content, but rather that they present the topic and everyone now has to discuss it around the table. And whenever they think that they're veering too far from where they want the subject to go, they may guide you back. But really it's an engagement, and it's a process of learning how to build on what each person is saying. And when you come in as a freshman, that's very hard. These are children who are very intelligent, they have a lot of ideas, they're often opinionated, and they're jumping all over each other. They're arguing at the table, sometimes they're cutting each other off. By the time they graduate, by the time they're seniors, it's like a harmony. They've learned how to build on each other's ideas. Oh, I agree with that. Why don't we incorporate this? And so they learn not only social skills around that table, but also how to engage and how to be appreciative of other people's ideas.
Yeah, I think that method that you're speaking about. I learned a little bit about similar methods with from from Paulo Freire in his book Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and he talked about in terms of how most methods of teaching is like, you know, the top down. The teacher has all the knowledge and he's pouring it into the students, or she is pouring into the students, whereas his approach was understanding that the knowledge is within the room, and he, you know, would often have the classes would be in a circle and it'd be shared knowledge, and it wouldn't be this whole top down approach. So when you say that after, you know, senior 4 years or what have you, the students gain this educational acumen to basically, you know, think and problem solve in a way that's cohesive and harmonious is certainly applauded and praiseworthy to where you the school that you went to.
Absolutely, and I think that's one thing I have to give them props on, that even in mathematics, right? We didn't get a textbook. They didn't say this is how you do such and such. This is how you solve such and such. What they did is they gave us multiple word problems where we ending up having to discover these formulas, and then they go, okay, well, this was the formula. I'm glad you found it. You know, kind of that method, which I think for some people, for me, that coming in, that was a real struggle, you know, because I'd never learned that way before. And it forces you to be an independent thinker, and it humbled me in a lot of senses, because, you know, I'd had trouble sometimes with certain things, you know, in elementary school or even in pre-K kindergarten, but it's not that same level where I felt like I was incredibly challenged, like I didn't know how to do something. And there were moments being at boarding school where the way that the content was being taught or what I had to learn was difficult for me, or I was struggling and I had to seek out help to do it. And for me, that was a lesson in learning how to seek out help, or to admit that I was having trouble with something, or to admit that some things are beyond me, and, you know, you have to find ways and methods to find the answer or solve the problem. And I think that really, as a child, that's a part of development.
Speaking of struggling and basically meeting challenges head on, you spoke a little earlier about Japanese and language. Tell us more about that, your desire to go into that realm, and how was that like for someone who's coming from the South Bronx and endeavoring to learn a language that's so foreign. It's not like we're saying Spanish or even French, but you're learning a language that in many cases would not even be considered.
So I guess my first exposure to Japanese was that I had a cousin who wanted to be a graphic novelist. And in Japanese, they have this one type of novel. It's called a manga. And I'm sure many people have heard about it. But my cousin, she said, you know, you want to be a writer? I want to do the art. Why don't you learn Japanese? And this was prior to me even going to boarding school that she had mentioned this. And she sat me down and made me try to write the characters. 100 times one character. And I was fed up. It was hard. I said, I don't know about this. But when I went away to boarding school and we had to pick a language, I wanted to take something a little less traditional. I wanted to challenge myself. And at the time in the boarding, in the dorm that I was put into, there was a teacher, and she was also a staff member called Miss Tizawa, and she was an amazing woman. But she basically came up to me and said, "Why are you not in my class? You know, I'm your faculty member. Why are you not in my class?" And Japanese was just one of the smallest language classes at Exeter, because most people were taking Spanish, French, Spanish, you know, French, Spanish, French, or things like Chinese, because Chinese was considered a business language. And when I went into the Japanese class, it was a small setting. There's only one teacher for Japanese as opposed to 2, 3, 4, 5 teachers like they had for other languages. And as I progressed, you know, through the levels, because there were so few people taking Japanese, we were all in one class. So it was a very warm, cozy setting in which we all knew each other. By the time we were seniors, there were only 3 of us in the Japanese class. And so that gave us real opportunities for to progress individually and to get a lot of attention and to focus and to work with each other and to practice with each other. And, you know, one day she came to me and she said, there's a program called SYA. They've just opened a new Japanese sector for Japanese. You can go away, you know, and study abroad if you write an essay, you know, and you get the scholarship to go. And I really didn't think I was going to get it. You know, I didn't think too seriously about it, but I'd seen the prompt and I thought it was interesting. Like I said, at that time, I'd wanted to be a writer. And I wrote it, and then, you know, it had to be a period of a few months. It's kind of hard to remember now. Someone came to me and they said, "You're going to Japan." And I really didn't know what to make of it at the time. And I went, and it was not a traditional study abroad experience in the sense that everything went smoothly, because at that time there ended up being a confrontation, you know, politically with Japan and China because of a fishing boat incident. And people in the neighborhood where I was staying as with my host family were going around with bullhorns protesting the Chinese. You know, it was really, you know, it was striking. And later, during that same period of the time I was there was a tsunami, and that was when the tsunami happened. And we were not near that area, but we were collecting some money. We ended up having to go to Okinawa because our families were worried. At some point, they were considering taking us to Vietnam, where SYA had another program. They had not accounted for how difficult it would be to have a program for SYA in Japan, because they hadn't really considered how much it would cost to fund that program, because Japan can be bureaucratical sometimes in the way they operate, and they were supposed to get us student visas, and they couldn't even really accomplish that. So we were there on tourist visa for the first part of the time that we were there. And when our tourist visas ran out, we had to run to Korea. So I went on a trip thinking I was going to Japan, and I ended up going to Korea. I ended up going to Okinawa, where the U.S. military bases were. For me, it was really just a complete overhaul of the way I had seen the world.
I mean, I'm amazed by you. You know, you mentioned Korea, you mentioned Japan, and all these other places. Like, and you're a girl from the South Bronx. Like, can we talk about just mentally? Like, where were you at? Were you excited to be in these new experiences, to have these new experiences in these new places?
At the time, I was nervous. You know, and I think some of that still remains with me. Growing up, you know, I was very sheltered. By my mother and my father, and I was very shy. So for me, you know, being thrust into all of these situations, you know, this bookworm who, you know, I'm just gonna write, I'm just gonna kind of be in my own house, doing in my own space, and being put in all of these social situations and these political situations, and really life leading me in these directions was forcing me kind of to come out of my shell and to wonder what part I play in this bigger picture. And as I ended up in Korea, and I ended up in, you know, I was in Japan, and, you know, heard about the confrontation with China, my first thought was, what is going on in the interactions between these different cultures? And, you know, this, because for me, growing up, I just thought, oh, that's all East Asia. And I became really interested in the relationship between these countries, and in the relationships between them and my own country, as I learned more about principles and beliefs and family dynamics and cultural dynamics. I wondered, you know, what results in this shift, in this divergence between our cultures. And so I began to study that. I decided, you know, when I went to college, that was what I wanted to continue to investigate. That what I really was interested in was not necessarily, I didn't want to write because I wanted to write. I wanted to write in a sense because I was very invested and interested in people, and in their emotions, and in their reactions, and in their behaviorisms, and why they do what they do, and why we think the way we think. And that these cultures were so different from my own that I really wanted to explore why we were what was different. And so when I went into college, I decided. And
what college did you go to?
Cornell University.
Okay.
I decided that I wanted to study Japan, China, Korea. That I wanted to learn the languages, you know, Japanese, Chinese, and Korean, and that I wanted to, you know, study about the world more deeply as a whole, and find out how we could bridge those differences in order to benefit all of us mutually.
So you mentioned that you wanted to learn about the cultures, and that you went to, you know, when you went to Cornell, you wanted to learn these languages. Did you learn these languages? I think that's the question. Did you learn these languages?
It's still a work in progress. I speak Japanese and Chinese, and My Korean is getting there. It's a little more of a struggle for me. I think the writing for Korean is easier, but speaking it is a little more challenging.
Okay, so you mean to tell me if there was a Japanese person in this room right now, would you be able to convey something? And I don't speak Japanese, but I would like to take your word for it. If there was a Japanese person in the room right now, what would you say? Like right now, what would you say to a Japanese person?
はじめまして、私はフラザニです。どうぞよろしくお願いします。
And what did you say?
Oh, I introduced myself. You said, you know, it's the first time we meet. I'm Xenia Fuller. Like, it's a pleasure to meet you, you know.
Okay, so now if there was a Chinese person in this room right now, and we didn't even talk about your Chinese experience, did you go away to China?
I did. I studied abroad in China during my college time.
Okay, so you studied abroad in Japan and China.
Yes.
And you're fluent Chinese as well in Mandarin, right?
When I'm not around someone, you know I'm a nervous personality, but I do okay when there's no
Okay, so please introduce how would you introduce yourself to I guess a Chinese person then?
我叫付欣婷，很高兴认识你。
And what did you say?
I said my Chinese name is Fu Xinting. It's great to meet you. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Oh my God! Listen, folks, I really wanted to have Ms. Fuller on the show today. The reason being is because I feel that, you know, our experiences can be so diverse. We come from a diverse people, and the world is diverse. And oftentimes, I see that many of us are like confined to these 4 blocks that we come from: Brooklyn, Bronx, Manhattan, and the world is so vast, and the opportunities are so vast. And hats off to Ms. Fuller's parents. Hats off to Ms. Fuller in general for having the notion, the gumption to say that, you know what, I want to study, I want to learn, I want to be this person that sees the world and is able to, you know, to not just see culture and learn about culture, but actually embrace the culture to the level that you're actually learning and you've learned these languages. And you know, I really thought that that's fascinating. In terms of the language in general, is there something in general that you would like to do with this language knowledge, or have you seen yourself as someone who can, you know, be an example for people or young girls coming up after you as it relates to language? What are some of your goals in this area?
Well, one of the reasons I wanted to learn languages is I wanted to be able to read the literature. And as anybody in my family can tell you, I have a whole library full of books in Japanese and Chinese. And I think because authors from different cultures have different perspectives, oftentimes it gives me a broader sense of a lot of topics. I do a lot of teaching. And growing up, maybe since the time I was 15 or 16, I taught first in Barbados and then here, usually one-on-one, but sometimes in class settings, teaching people language. Because sometimes people don't think that they can do it. And I think sometimes it's about teaching people a language, but sometimes it's about teaching people that they're capable of things that they don't believe that they're able to do. And I think that a lot of times, you know, I've run into 5-year-olds and I've run into 50 or 60-year-olds who say, oh, I love, you know, Japanese or anime or manga or K-pop or any of those things that they see sometimes in their environment. But I could never learn that. And I say, look, I can teach a 5-year-old the whole Japanese alphabet in about 20 or 30 minutes. And they say, well, I can't learn that. And I say, yes, you can. Let's try it. And then they realize that they can, because oftentimes the perception of something as being hard is much more of a factor than the actual hardness of something, because we tend to put ourselves in boxes and we limit ourselves when we say, I'm not the kind of person who can do this or can do that. And so I think that teaching people language, yes, they learn a language and they learn to engage with others from another culture and they learn how to think in a different way, because when you learn language, you have to kind of think about concepts in a different way because certain languages express things differently. But I also think that it teaches people that they are able to do things that they didn't really believe that they could do, in the sense that they have to widen first their understanding of who they are and the kind of discipline that they can have, because learning a language oftentimes takes a lot of discipline. You go in and you're like, oh, this is going to be easy. This is not going to be that bad. And the more you know, the more it seems like you have to know. Because we don't really think when we necessarily speak English, wow, I know over 80,000 words. On a daily basis, how many different words am I using?
Yeah.
But I think it also increases our understanding of those who are around us, who are coming from other places, because we know what they're going through when they have to acclimate and learn not only about a completely new place, but a completely new language and new ways of expressions. When we say, hey, what's up? We're asking, how are you? Sometimes I've seen people, they're looking up. They're like, what do you mean, what's up? This the ceiling, you know? Or when, you know, when I went to China, you know, someone's like, have you eaten? And I'm like, no, I haven't eaten. But they're not asking me. That's a customary greeting sometimes, like, how are you doing? Like, it's just a greeting. They don't really care if I've eaten or not. And so, you know, you really have to learn
customs and yeah.
Right. You have to learn not only to think differently, but to realize that you shouldn't limit yourself. And sometimes my students, they come to learn a language and they walk out of there with a renewed confidence in what they are able to do, and the understanding that everything is hard before it's easy.
So speaking of limitations, I think that you know, you're a prime example of the limit of the sky, and not to let anyone stop you from going out there and pursuing that. And for me, in the work that I do, I think it's important to empower parents to understand that their children are sponges, and what we invest in our children would allow them to be those leaders in the future. You know, we've seen research that students of color are like hundreds of thousands of words behind in terms of, you know, what they read, how their parents speak. So for you to be someone that is an example of going out there and learning different cultures, especially in the climate of today where, you know, immigration and all these other areas, it's a testament to, again, who you are and what you've done and how, you know, and where you're going. And I think that this part of your life, your ability to learn this language, is just the tip of the iceberg. I'm sure there's so much more that you can do as a result to children, as a result to the community, as a result to just being, you know, a correspondent that's learning Asian or speaking about Asian affairs. So I can just see so much more for you. I can see so much work that you're doing. But we can go on and on about this. We can go on and on about this subject. But I'd like to thank you, first and foremost, for coming on the show and agreeing to share your story. I think your story is a great example for many people in the community, including young women in our community, but as well as young men and anyone in the community, because you said you work with children as well as adults. But would you be so kind as to share some final words? Please address the camera. Share some final words, you know, in terms of, you know, would you like to leave the viewers with, and if possible, maybe leave the Japanese viewers as well as the Chinese viewers with a greeting.
I don't know if I will do that, but I do want to say that we're capable of anything that we believe that we're capable of, and that we should not limit ourselves in saying that we are the type of people who can do something and can't do others. I think that everything that we do is difficult before it's easy, and that expertise comes not from ease in doing something or a natural talent in doing something, but investing in what we're doing and investing in ourselves. And everything we do is an investment in ourselves, because no one can take that from us. And that's something that I want to leave everyone with.
Absolutely. So once again, this has been another episode of Voices, Visionaries offering information with clarity, expertise, and substance. I'm your host, Keston Jones, signing off. Peace.